What's going on, guys? Welcome to Victims and Villains. If you happen to be new to this channel, we discuss mental health through pop culture, and we introduce you to a couple cool flicks along the way. My name's Captain Nostalgia, and today we're talking about Kill Her Goats. Now, this is part of our Creature Feature 2023 coverage. All of the videos that we did at this year's, including interviews with the Chiodos brothers, who are the writers and directors behind Killer Clowns from Outer Space, Danny Lloyd, who played Danny Torrance in The Shining, and Jim Crut, the famous and iconic helicopter zombie from Dawn of the Dead. We'll all be having interviews on this channel. We're going to be putting out a full-length podcast at some point in April. You'll have the audio version of those videos as well. So make sure that you hit subscribe here and subscribe to Abyss Gazing, because that will be the channel where it all goes, because everything horror goes there, and short little reviews like this one find their way here. Now, this is the only movie that I was able to catch that is a new release. So this is the only film that I'll be talking about. I'll probably do a video in a couple of days talking about some of the shorts that I got to catch this year, but I basically caught this movie and wanted to share my thoughts on it. Now, if you guys are interested in checking out this movie, it is going to have a wide release April 28th, but also you guys can now pre-order the film in the descriptions below. And shout out to With an O Productions, the company behind this film we're getting ready to talk about. Kill Her Goats tells the story of a young girl who buys a supposedly haunted house, and her and her friends spend the night in said haunted house and discover that the tall tales that the town said about said property is in fact true. Before I even share my thoughts on this movie, I want to put this disclaimer out there. This is a movie that is going to be for a very niche audience. This isn't a horror movie that you can just kind of throw on and everybody will enjoy this. This is going to be for a very niche audience, and I'm going to explain what that means. With the success of Halloween behind me, this is the Rob Zombie version. So with John Carpenter's Halloween and Shawnee S. Cunningham's Friday the 13th, there was a rise in the desire for slashers in the early 80s, and studios would release them theatrically, but this was also around the same time that you had a rise in direct-to-video movies. Movies that now share a cult status among the horror community. Films like The Mutilator, Slumber Party Massacre, Sorority House Massacre, and so on and so forth. These were basically bare bones essentials. And I have a love-hate relationship with that era of slashers, and that's kind of what this movie reminds me of. I'm going to just put this out there. Tonally speaking, this film feels very much reminiscent of the films of the 80s. This is the best way that I can describe it. If you've seen Terrifier 1 or 2, or you've seen anything with Art the Clown feels like it takes today's brutality, but it feels like this has a lot more reminiscent with the mainstream horror of the 80s, where you're talking about Freddy, Jason, Michael, etc. And this film, Kill Her Goats, feels like those direct-to-video sequels where you spend an hour with the films. Sure, there's a couple violence sprinkled in and out, but the height of the violence happens in the third act. That is what this film reminds me of. It reminds me of films like The Mutilator, Slumber Party Massacre, etc. And that's not a knock on the quality of the film. I want to start off by saying that this movie looks pristine. The cinematography in this movie is just absolutely gorgeous, for the most part. This is a movie that I've seen pop up on my sponsored ads on Instagram and Facebook for a couple months now. I will definitely say that they know how to market this movie, but part of the marketing that I really loved is these gorgeous and really stunning night shots. And this movie has, I would say, probably about 95% of the shots look pristine. It definitely keeps in with that richness. But when you have 95% of your movie that looks just absolutely breathtaking, and then you have 5% of these shots that kind of look fuzzy and out of focus, those shots tend to stick out more. And unfortunately, being a cinephile, I happened to notice shots like that, and that definitely kind of got under my skin while watching this. And when you see this movie on the big screen, it's kind of right there. It's just kind of like, BAM! Right in your face. I want to start by saying that the acting of this movie, let's be honest, when you're a slasher fan, you're not coming to movies for the acting. And if you're coming for the slashers, this is the perfect movie for you. I want to say the acting of this movie feels passable by standards. Most of these actresses are not actresses, they are legit models. Writer-director Steve Wolsh definitely uses that to his advantage, to a point so I would say that is almost distracting in certain portions of the movie. This movie just kind of feels sexual just because it can. But again, Walsh knows his audience, and this is going to be an audience that he is making this movie for. And honestly, I can respect that. I know that not every movie is going to be for a general audience, and Kill Her Goats definitely feels like that. The way that it sets up, the way that it structures itself, and also some of the shots featuring its cast. I want to say this is also Kane Hodder's latest movie, and that was kind of the selling point for me to check out this movie. Is I love Kane Hodder as Jason Voorhees. I love him as Victor Crowley. I love seeing him pop up in things like Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, which we did an episode on, and you should totally check out. The link's in the description below. I even loved his documentary, To Hell and Back, his kind of like triumphant story of overcoming adversity in his life. And Hodder is absolutely the selling point for me in this movie. I thought that he does a great job. He's got a gnarly weapon. First off, the costume design of this film looks immaculate. And the way that they use goats to kind of like be an extension of his character, I just thought was really well done. But he's actually really menacing. The way that they use shadows in this movie, I thought was really well done. And just his weapon is so cool. It's essentially like two hedge trimmers like mounted together. One goes this way and one goes this way, and it makes him so incredibly terrifying. He definitely steals the show in this movie. But then there's a point where Kill Her Goats just breaks all the rules of slashers, and that's the turning point that really made me fall in love with this movie. While it is a little bit of a slow burn, it's worth that burn, because the ending of this movie, probably the last act of this movie, really just has so many twists and turns. It's immensely fun, it's bloody, it has a lot of great gags, but also it just consistently breaks the rules of what you expect the slasher formula to be. That's the kind of the point where I felt like not only do they use the Kane Hodder better in the third act, but also on top of that, they utilize the entire cast better in that act, and it just takes you to places that you just weren't expecting. My one last complaint about this movie is a point where the characters actually break off and kind of do their own things before reuniting in the movie, and one of the characters just goes to sleep, and it's kind of exploring this like dream-like sequence that literally has no effect to the overall narrative. And this isn't like a 2 or 3 minute sequence. This is like a 10-minute sequence almost. I mean, I could be wrong on that, but it definitely felt really long, and it just kind of felt like it took away from the movie. I feel like my complaints for this movie are very low, but when they are present, they are very present. So I'm going to go run this through our Rorschach rating scale. I'm going to go ahead and give Kill Her Goats a 3 out of 5. I think it's a really strong slasher, but again, it's only going to appeal to a niche audience. I feel like it has some pacing issues here and there. There's a weird dream sequence, and it's a little bit of a slow burn, but the last act of this movie absolutely more than makes up for it, and offers a lot of twists and turns that make this not only a fun, but also a surprising movie by its end. Alright, so if you guys have seen Kill Her Goats on the festival circuit, comment below and let me know. If you guys are looking forward to this movie, comment below, let me know. But again, this movie is available right now for pre-order. Comments in the description in the below will have a link to that. But let's talk about mental health. If you guys are new to our content, Mental Health Moment is where we take a theme of mental health out of the film which we're talking about, talk about it for a few moments in the hopes to deconstruct the stigma surrounding mental health. There's a point in the very beginning of this movie where we're introduced to a very minor character who just happens to be our protagonist, Audra's ex-boyfriend. He's moved on, but the film makes it clear that he still has feelings and is still processing the breakup. I've talked about this on the podcast several times, but I will put it here right now in case you guys haven't heard this story. And if you have, I'm sorry you have to hear it again. There's no really easy way to say this. I got around in high school. I got around before I met my wife. I was what I classify as a male whore. And part of that process was me not taking time to really grieve the relationships and not really taking the time to allow myself to sit and deconstruct the heartache that I just felt. Because whether you've been with someone for 12 days or 12 years, feelings and attachments don't really have a date of when you have them. If you have them, you have them, and you need to grieve them properly and allow those wounds to properly heal. And a part of my process, it was just jumping from girl to girl. And it wasn't until I had one of my very first serious girlfriends that I actually allowed myself to grieve. I went through depression. I went through self-harm. And it was the time in my life that I would argue, is the lowest that I've ever felt. And is the point where my life where I actually wanted to just not be alive and almost committed suicide. It's a portion of that story that makes content like this and conversations so important. And while I'm not going to try and give a backstory for this relationship that we see in this film, heartache is something that is never easy to get over. Heartache is something that needs to be grieved and needs to be grieved properly. Because even though you move on and find yourself a new love interest, partner, spouse, etc., at the end of the day, that stuff doesn't matter if you still have not grieved those feelings that you once had properly. And I say that from someone who knows that. Because when I went through that depression after my first serious relationship, it was like I lamented every relationship along with that first time, like that first time relationship, and grieved even harder. When heartache isn't dealt with in the proper and healthy way, outlets like community and therapy, or even creative and output, you are opening yourself up to deeper wounds like depression, suicide, self-harm, and even more. If you or someone you know is currently experiencing any of these signs or are experiencing anything like depression, suicide, addiction, or self-harm, click the links in the descriptions below to check out our mental health resource library. This is the very heartbeat of why we make this content. I love introducing you guys to new films like Kill Her Goats, but at the end of the day, this is the real reason why we make this content. I hope that encouraged you guys. If you guys like what we stand for, consider hitting the subscribe button below. And the links down below, you will find not only the pre-order link, once again, for Kill Her Goats and the website, but you guys will also find links to all of our social media, all of the podcasts that we produce, how to give to us, how to support us financially, and most importantly, that mental health resource library. So until next time, remember, stay classy.